Surveillance footage may have been a key factor in the arrest of a man accused of shooting to death a 17-year-old girl in California. We're going to break down the video and other evidence in this case with forensic expert Alina Burroughs. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Hey, so this episode is sponsored by Simply Safe. There is no safe like Simply Safe. When it comes to evidence, DNA, eyewitness, forensic digital, all so important in proving a crime was committed, right? We talk about it all the time. But there is one particular piece of evidence that really can seal a case for prosecutors, and that is surveillance footage, right? That visual medium, so impactful, so important. And today, I want to talk about a key piece of surveillance footage that may have helped solve a murder case. We're going to go to Long Beach, California, March 26, 2024. 17-year-old Briana Soto is shot while walking home. Just finished talking to her mom on the phone. This happened at around 8:30 p.m. and I want you to remember that time because it's going to be important. And apparently, she was just feet away from the door of her place near 11th Street and Lewis Avenue when this happened. Her family had heard the gunshots. They rushed outside. They find her, took her to the hospital, and she died 3 days later. So now the question is, of course, who would have done this, right? Well, that leads me to the surveillance footage component that I want to talk about. This surveillance footage that was released by police of that night. Now, I'm going to walk you through it. There's no sound to it, but it's important. So you see this individual walking in the neighborhood at 8:20 p.m. So this is right before Briana is shot to death. The guy is dressed in dark clothing with a hood, wearing a mask, appears to have hands in his pockets. That's one angle. Then the view shifts to another camera, the side shot of the individual walking. By the way, no one else appears to be around. Then we hit another camera angle, more of this back shot of the individual walking, appears to briefly look down. They even slowed the video down to it, at least that's what it looks like it appears. Well, Long Beach County Police Chief Wally Habish released this video and said, quote, "We also have reason to believe that the suspect ran southbound immediately following the murder and began removing garments. And police, they asked for anyone's help after they released this footage in April." So what happens? Well, you fast forward just a few days ago, and there has been an arrest for Briana's murder. 34-year-old Long Beach resident Troy Lamar Fox. And police indicate that his arrest comes through, quote, investigative leads, including DNA, video, and cellular phone evidence. Now, at the time of his arrest, Fox apparently was in the custody of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department on an unrelated weapons violation. So there's a few things here. It was reported that he was on post-release community supervision for unlawfully possessing a firearm, but allegedly violated the terms of that release. And then Fox has also been arrested in connection with another case, an attempted murder from another shooting. This one on April 9th, 2024, where officers responded to shots fired at the 1300 block of Pine Avenue. Police say Fox is suspected of discharging a gun at 3 juveniles and 1 adult in a car. So this is a month after Briana's death. And then there's another incident from July 7th, 2024, where officers responded to the area of 14th Street and Pine Avenue regarding a report of guns inside of a car. And police find Fox and a juvenile and learned that they were both prohibited from having firearms. So police end up retrieving 2 guns on Fox and this juvenile, and 4 are recovered from the car. With all that in mind, I want to talk about this, and I want to bring on former crime scene investigator and forensic expert Alina Burroughs to talk more about this. Alina, thank you so much for coming back here on Sidebar.
Of course.
So let's start with that surveillance footage. Generally speaking, before we even talk about this footage, that, I'm right? That is so crucial in any case.
You know, it helps, but it also depends on the quality of the surveillance footage we're looking at. You know, I think everybody has seen really clear surveillance footage and they've seen really grainy surveillance footage. So it kind of depends on what we're looking at, especially in this instance when we have somebody who is wearing dark clothing and wearing a mask that could potentially obscure some of the features. It might be less valuable than some other evidence.
But when you look at this, right, in general, cameras are everywhere. We got 3 angles of them from 3 different locations. So it makes me feel, particularly in urban areas, it's becoming increasingly more difficult to evade detection. I mean, we just covered a case recently about this elected official in Nevada who killed a journalist, and he was on surveillance footage. He was dressed up, right? He was in disguise, but that footage became crucial to the case. What he was wearing, those items were found at his house. So, I mean, cameras now are everywhere.
They are everywhere, especially with the advent of intersection cameras that track a lot of traffic, and all the doorbell cams that everybody has. You can
Yeah.
literally follow people through neighborhoods going from one person's doorbell cam to the next. And something that surveillance video does for us, other than ID the individual, is show us things like the direction they came from, the direction they went. And in this instance, if the individual's removing clothing, we might have captured that, and evidence that would have otherwise gone unnoticed, as a balled up t-shirt on the roadway, may now be super critical because it was captured on camera.
And the time, right? That 8:20 timestamp is so critical here. And here you see more than, I actually think you see more in this kind of footage than you see in other cases. You can't quite make out who he is, but you can kind of see the gait. You can kind of see the direction. You see the clothing. What do you think from this footage helped law enforcement?
Well, certainly, like I said, it gives them a direction. So they knew what direction that person was headed. It also gives them the neighborhood. They can go and interview other people in that neighborhood to determine, is this somebody that you've seen here before? And from what it sounds like, these crimes that happened in April and July and this last one all seem to be in a kind of the same neighborhood. So it's likely that people that live there whose doorbell cams have captured this individual will be able to say, yeah, I know that person. That's so and so.
By the way, what does this episode of Sidebar show you? I mean, other than the fact that the world is an incredibly dangerous and scary place, having the right surveillance cameras, the importance of surveillance footage, that can be so crucial. And look, right now it's fall. Families, they're returning to work, to school. There's tons of outdoor fall activities, and homes, they're being left empty during the day. And it's so important to consider the heightened risk of burglaries that occur in the fall. Well, here is the good news. Simply Safe is now a proud sponsor of Sidebar and is offering a solution to keep your home secure. Look, I live in an area where there have been break-ins. People's cars are getting stolen right from their driveway. I actually live near a lot of older people too, which makes it even more scary. So having a security system that you can trust to protect your loved ones is huge. Simply Safe has advanced sensors and cameras that detect threats from break-ins to fires to floods. With Simply Safe, you also get 24/7 professional monitoring, which includes Simply Safe agents that are ready to spring into action to keep you safe. They promptly assess the situation, they contact you, they dispatch first responders to your address, even if you're away or maybe you can't respond. And with Fast Protect monitoring and Live Guard protection, Simply Safe agents, they can act within 5 seconds of receiving your alarm. Also, super easy to install. I set it up, doorbell, porch, I can watch different camera angles on my phone, able to activate it in no time. So now you're thinking, okay, what's the catch? It has to be super expensive, right, Jesse? You would be wrong, because you will never be locked into a long-term contract. You can cancel at any time. Pricing is transparent. It's affordable. It starts at less than $1 a day. There are no hidden fees ever. And right now you can save 50% on your system, plus a free indoor security camera, and your first month is free when you sign up for core monitoring. So visit simplysafe.com/sidebar to customize yours. That's simplysafe.com/sidebar. There is no safe like Simply Safe. And look, I'm speculating here. I don't know, but wearing a mask, wearing the hood, wearing the dark clothing, that could be to avoid detection from people seeing you, but could also be because there's an acknowledgement that surveillance cameras are everywhere.
Absolutely. And even more, it goes to prove that this wasn't a spur of the moment decision. This wasn't something that the individual was just out walking and got into an altercation and decided to pull a weapon. This shows nobody goes out at 8:30 at night wearing a hoodie and a mask unless their intent is to not be identified. What are
Right.
you doing that you don't want to be identified for? So I think that goes even further to prove the case.
Yeah, look, people wear masks even to this day because of COVID, but it's not 2020 anymore. And you have to wonder if there's other reasons that they might be wearing a mask so late at night when no one seemed to be around. Now, talk about the other evidence. There's not a lot here. I want to be clear. There's not a lot here. We don't have a lot of information. And they haven't been clear about what DNA evidence they have that linked them back to Fox. I know this is a tough question. What could it be?
So if we're speculating, it could be clothing that he abandoned along the way. And then we'd be looking at something called wearer DNA. And the collar of shirts, the rim of a baseball cap, the cuffs of long sleeve hoodies, those are all great areas to capture wearer DNA, meaning the DNA of the wearer of that clothing item. Now, if this individual, if Fox has committed a felony prior, then he is in the CODIS database. They could have done a CODIS search and found DNA that pointed them in that direction. When we look at the actual shooting, that DNA possibility there is going to be highly dependent upon distance, how close Fox was to Soto when he fired the weapon. We have something called backwards spatter. So backwards spatter would travel opposite of the direction of the force or the bullet in this case. So we could see our victim DNA traveling backward onto his clothing, mask, if he was in close proximity when that shooting took place. That's a possibility.
That's so
Another thing we need to look at is there are 3 cases now that they feel like he is involved in. If they can link cases, they could potentially have DNA on the April case that they have now linked him to this most recent case. And now the evidence from the April case, the evidence from the July case all comes into play with this case, even though we don't have as much evidence here. All of those things could be possibilities.
That's such a great point. And I'm curious, when you process a crime scene, when you process a shooting scene in an open area like that, couple things. A, is it difficult to do that? And B, could you obtain DNA from a shell casing if they recovered any?
DNA from shell casings has happened before, but it's fairly rare because of the firearm process and the heat. Heat is one thing that kills DNA, and that casing is going to be superheated in the process of firing a weapon. Obviously, we don't know if it's a semi-automatic or a revolver at this point, but we also have the potential to link cases or link our suspect to that crime scene by the weapon. Sounds like he's got a long history here. So we could have bullets matching that are recovered. Crime scene investigators are recovering from scenes or from victims that can be matched back to a firearm. We've got cartridge casings. If this is a semi-automatic, it's ejecting them on the scene. Now we've got our April, our July, and this case to potentially link together. We also have the NIBIN database, which is the National Integrated Ballistics Information Network. It's kind of like fingerprints for people, because each firearm leaves things like firing pin impressions, breech block, ejector, extractor. All of these markings are left behind on a cartridge casing that could point us back to that particular firearm.
That's a great, Alina, this is really, really helpful because, again, we don't have this kind of information, but we're kind of getting a sense of maybe what's been happening behind the scenes. And then the cellular evidence, right? What could that be?
Cell evidence is also dependent upon things like how close you are. Are there mountains, or is there water, the cell strength, but it generally gives you a direction that that person is kind of facing from the cell tower. To me, that's the icing on the cake. Because if there is any chance that that individual says, it wasn't me, I wasn't there, we now are looking at the totality of evidence. So we have cell data that might place that person there. We've got surveillance data that, hey, if we even can't see all of you, but that pretty much looks like you. And maybe we see you in surveillance with a mask, and we find that mask and it's got your DNA from breathing on it. So that all of those things are placing you at that particular scene. It's kind of the icing on the cake.
I still don't understand the why about this,
Yeah.
right? It seems so random, so savage, so out of nowhere. But then you think that he might be linked to these other shootings. Again, we don't know what the motivation would be, but that pattern, does that establish an MO? How does that help establish a motive of some kind?
It could. I'd like to see the victims of our April and our July cases to see if he's targeting juveniles, because we know Briana Soto was a juvenile. We know in one of those cases he was shooting at a vehicle that contained 3 juveniles. I would like to kind of put all of those pieces together and look at things like, is it a time of day? Is there an event that particularly triggered this? Motive is something that, we don't have to prove, but everybody wants to know as human beings, why is this something that happened to an innocent girl walking home from work, talking on the phone to her mother? These cases are particularly frightening for the general public because a lot of times we can go about life thinking that crime happens somewhere else. It happens to other people. It happens to drug dealers. It happens to another part of society that I'm not a part of. And when we have incidents like this, where we see a little girl doing what she's supposed to be doing, her mother, so close to home, her mother has to hear the gunshots. And this brings crime very close to home for a lot of people that never thought of crime as something that would happen to them or in their community.
And to bring it back to Briana for a second, the chief of police for Long Beach County, as I mentioned, Wally Habish, released a statement saying Briana Soto was just 17 years old when she was tragically taken away from her family by a violent individual willing to commit such a reprehensible and brazen act of violence. Briana's death has left her family devastated and has impacted our department immensely. The detectives, officers, and professional staff assigned to this investigation have utilized every available resource to identify and apprehend this suspect, who we believe is responsible for Briana's murder, as well as 2 other gun-related crimes in our community. The suspect has demonstrated a willingness to inflict harm on others, and we will be working closely with our partners throughout the criminal justice system to ensure Briana and her family receive the justice they deserve. Now, as of last reporting, Mr. Fox was in jail on a $2 million bail. Police plan to present their case to the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office for the filing of charges. And they're also encouraging anybody with information to reach out to homicide detectives at 562-570-7244. Anonymous tips can be provided to LA Regional Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477 or online at lacrimestoppers.org. Alina, what kind of tips do you think they could get? What kind of information are they looking for at this stage of the process?
They could be looking at, did you sell a firearm to any individual? Have you received a firearm for pawn or for sale from other individuals? Really, I think they're looking at, we have that pattern of multiple cases. This is the 3rd that they potentially are linking him to that they know about. So the more cases that they can find and link him to, the greater the likelihood of conviction and getting a dangerous person off the streets.
Alina Burroughs, thank you so much for coming on. Really, really appreciate your perspective and your expertise. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.